Hello friends, today I'm going to be taking you through a simple explanation of the two main blending techniques used in colored pencil art. That is the burnishing technique and the use of solvent. After, I'll show you which technique is appropriate depending on the type of drawing you are doing, and then show you examples of artworks I did using these techniques. So obviously we need to layer before we blend. Before I demonstrate these techniques, I'll be doing this exact same drawing on the right just to quickly demonstrate layering. I have an entire video on layering, so you may want to check that out after this video. I used the Prismacolor Premier pencils for this demonstration. So we start with the base layer, which is the lightest color. In this demonstration, the base layer is light cerulean blue. After, I went over the base layer with the darker colors and built the layers gradually until I got to the darkest color, which in this case was black. Let's discuss the first method, which is burnishing. I'll be using the light cerulean blue and white colored pencils for this, and I'll explain why in a bit. Burnishing is simply applying a lot of pressure with the colored pencil to fully blend out all the layers together. So after layering, we choose a color to use for our burnishing. Now some colored pencil sets come with a colorless blender which allows you to blend out all the layers, but some do not, and I usually do not use a colorless blender. I use a color that is similar to the ones I use to layer my pencils to blend. When choosing a color to use as your blender, there are two main things to consider. 1. Make sure the color is similar to the ones you already used in your layering. That way, you would not introduce a completely new color that could destroy your layers. Secondly, it should not be a very dark color. It should preferably be very light so that the different levels of layering can be easily seen. Now some people like to use the white colored pencil for blending, and that's fine. However, I suggest that you use the white colored pencil for very light areas of the drawing, like you would see me demonstrate here in a bit. This is because white has the propensity to desaturate your colors, so you end up losing a lot of the vibrance in your drawing if you use white to blend out all the parts of your drawing. If you are not sure what color to use for blending, I suggest you consider using your base layer, like I did here. The base layer, as I initially said, is already the lightest color in your drawing, so it makes sense to use that as your blender. When you get to the very light areas of your drawing, you can then use the white colored pencil. These areas do not contain a lot of layers, and therefore you wouldn't lose much using the white colored pencil to do your blending. Burnishing takes a little more effort if you are working with a rough textured paper. Because so much of the tooth of the paper is visible, you would have to do enough layers and apply a little more effort to successfully hide as much of the tooth of the paper as possible. Now this doesn't mean you should avoid rough textured papers. In fact, I use them a lot in my drawings, probably more than I use smooth papers. This is because rough textured papers allow me to do a lot of layers compared to smooth papers. The more layers you have, the more opportunity you have to create more depth, and the more depth you have, the more realism you have. Personally, I prefer the Strathmore Bristol 300 and 500 series, especially the 500 series. Now, depending on the paper you are using, you may still be able to go back with your colors even after burnishing, just to redefine certain areas, and then blend again. This is mostly possible if you are using a rough textured paper. If you're enjoying this, don't forget to subscribe for more tips and tutorials. Also, check out my free ebook on the basics of realistic colored pencil art. I'll put a link in the description. You'll find more information about layering and blending in there. Now let's talk about the solvent technique for blending. I use a turpentine based solvent, but you can use any type. They all work pretty well. I know of alcohol based ones and some odorless spirits, and you can get them from any art supply shop. I dip the brush into the solvent and apply it gently on the drawing. However, I make sure to dab off some extra solvent from the brush before applying it to the drawing. You can use any tissue or towel to dab off the extra solvent. Now this is very important. You don't want to have too much of the solvent on the brush because that will pretty much mess up your drawing. So this is what the solvent does. It breaks down the pigment of the pencil and spreads it across the paper. This is why artworks with solvent blending tend to look a little smoother than those done with the burnishing technique. Typically, I do 2 rounds of blending with the solvent. After the first one, I wait for about 5 to 10 minutes for the solvent to dry out, apply my colored pencil again in the same manner as the first, and then blend again. However, you can do as many sessions of blending as you please, depending on how many rounds of layering your paper can take. After the final round of blending, I redefine a few areas with the colored pencils. Vellum or rough textured papers tend to take a lot more layers than smooth papers. When blending, also ensure you move from the light regions of the drawing to the darker regions to avoid mixing up the colors. Always ensure you have enough pigment layered before you blend to avoid having patchy areas. Another way you can apply the solvent is to apply it right after applying the base layer. Wait for it to dry before applying the subsequent layers and then blending everything afterwards. Apart from the brush, you can also use a Q-tip, especially when blending smaller areas. It's also important to note that blending with the solvent allows you to layer even lighter colors on top of a blended layer easily, something which may be a little hard to achieve when you burnish, especially if you use a smooth paper. When you layer on top of a solvent blended layer, it almost feels like a fresh start. The colors are usually still vibrant and noticeable. Now let's move on to some practical application of these techniques. They both have their merits. I always use the solvent technique when drawing animals that have feathers or fur. This is because you would usually require a lot of layers when drawing fur, and using the solvent allows for several vibrant layers. Like I said, you can also easily layer lighter colors on top of a layer blended with solvent. When you draw fur and things like whiskers, which are usually light in color, using the solvent becomes the better option. Other types of drawing I use solvent for are things like fruits, like the one I did in this drawing, which I'll be putting a link to in the description. When drawing the eyeballs of both humans and animals, I use solvent to blend. This is because of the smooth effect it produces. However, when it comes to the skin, I always use the burnishing technique. The skin is not shiny smooth, so blending with a solvent can make it look a bit unnatural. That is why I prefer to burnish instead. However, in areas where things appear to be a bit out of focus or blurry, like some parts of the hair and neck in this image, I use the solvent technique to achieve this effect. Other instances where I may use the solvent when drawing portrait is when the subject is, for instance, wearing a very vibrant shade of lipstick or anything of the sort. Because as I said earlier, the solvent allows me to retain a lot of vibrance. If you enjoyed this, I suggest you watch this video right here where I go in depth on the subject of layering. Don't forget to subscribe for more tutorials, and I'll see you in the next one.